So a quick run through behind the scenes here, or the game itself first before we go behind the scenes. Every turn, you're going to have 5 choices. These are the 5 S's: sort, set, shine, standardize, sustain. They have specific meanings in Lean. These are the Japanese terms right next to them. There's a lot of text here, which this is meant as a standalone single person, so there's a lot of text. The sort, your team spends time putting everything into a way that they can then make decisions on it, but they don't actually do anything. Set is when things are in position, they take them and throw them away if they're bad, or get rid of them if they're inaccurate. Shine is sort of a weekly cleaning activity, general hygiene, and making sure bad things don't get in there. Standardize is creating processes based on what you've done. So you're actually taking what you've learned and documenting it. And sustain is sort of cultural change. It's working with your customers, your managers, to help them understand why the database is changing. And so we can just sort of randomly pick some just to show here. Oh, and this will show what the percentages of team that you spent last week on. You submit a turn, and it takes you slowly. So this is a rolling 4-week average. It shows no change at first because it's a delayed average, but you can see your team productivity, which shows the new and accurate articles written, which is currently low because you are spending time doing 5S. Old or inaccurate articles removed. We're doing a lot of work on that because we're cleaning up. And it shows you the size of the database. Now, this is supposed to be realistic in that you don't know what the right size is. You don't know how many inaccurate articles or old articles you have. You only have these 3 pieces of information to make decisions on: time delayed customer sat, a productivity, and the size of the database. So from this, you go back now and I'll kind of move forward a little bit here. So we're going to do these again. Submit the turn. And we can see that changes are beginning to happen. Slowly team productivity. Now I feel like and I can go on any one of these. I can look at a tip here. If I want to see a tip, it'll give me a tip on how to use it on any of these sort of light bulbs. Go ahead here. And you can see as you start to change things, there's some dynamic behavior. You've capped out and are now getting a declining return on removing articles. That can be interpreted many different ways. Your database is changing. And I'll just kind of quickly go through here so we can start seeing some of the customer behavior. So you can see now the 4-week average. You're starting to see the customer line start to change. It's time delayed, though. So the trick for the players, of course, is if you start reacting to this number here, that's based on what you did or weighted to what you did several weeks ago. And if you react to that, you're going to be in trouble. So in some ways, this is like the beer game because you're getting often old and inaccurate. So let's say we're just going to go ahead if there are questions or comments right now.
Yeah, Tim, what in this case, what are the success metrics?
The success metrics are, here, I'll go back and show them again. They're on this customer sat. It is accessibility, is how easy is it for customers to find articles. Now, that's a formula in the model, but you don't know what that formula is. Because as a manager, it's a customer service, say how easy is it to find articles, and it's like a little scale, you get a percent, but you don't know actually how customers find articles. Accuracy is the percentage of accurate versus inaccurate. Again, you don't know how many inaccurate in there because there's not a tool here to go search and catalog. And then currency is the overall how current the articles are. Old articles, as they age, they get less useful. And so these are your 3 scales of success here, is these 3 customer sat. And then there's a blended score that will show 3. And so you can kind of look at your productivity, size of database, and you can see it's leveling out. Did that answer your question, Fred?
Yeah, I think so. I was just trying to understand if the players, have a mechanism for adaptive learning here based on what's happening.
Well, they will. At the end, there's a debriefing. I'm just going to try and get forward so we can see the debriefing. The only feedback they're getting during the game is the customer. It's basically to teach them how to deploy this in a real environment where you're getting often not much information while you're doing this, and to say how well do you use what you've been trained and learn from it. Now, part of that is let me finish this out here. I'm just gonna, so you can see here. And I'll just submit. So, okay, so we finished the games, right? You head to the debrief. Show me the debrief. So here is where you actually begin to get some of that adaptive learning, and I apologize if they're small. You got a little text up here, but your original survey results are the top line of gauges, and you can quickly look at the bottom line of gauges, except I've got something blocking that. And you can see that your accuracy, your accessibility are all worse than they started, but one of them's better. So your blended score over here on the right actually went down. So you did worse. You got worse than where you goes. And how do you know and learn about this is, right? So now you have a dashboard, and Billy, it would be great if I could put a button on every one of these graph tabs to explain what they're seeing on this graph tab. I can only put it on the page, though, unless I'm missing something. But on these reports, you now see everything that's going on behind the scenes. And I'm not really sure how well the terminology is here. There's a lot of help files and other lessons, but this is where the learning would occur, Fred. So we already know the 4-week rolling customer sat. We know the size of the database. This is information we already had. We know team productivity, right? So this is all information we had. One thing that's added here is it's the increase via erroneous articles. So all along, what wasn't clear is that bad articles were being contributed because of the complexity in the database. People were doing errors and sort of making copies. As you went around and cleaned things up, the amount of them generally decreased over time, which generally helped clean the database up. So this is, again, something that would be a new piece of information that you don't always see when you're doing it, but is useful to know it's there lurking in the background. The system memories, this is every action you did with the time effect as it fades. So as you do actions in the game, you start out and it jumps up to a level of effectiveness, but then begins to fade over time. Just like if you clean your garage and then you don't do anything, it will gradually get worse. So the benefit of cleaning your garage goes away over time. And this is a really big lesson to learn in 5S, so that as you just do the beginning stuff and don't follow up with standardizing your processes or doing the cultural change, it fades over time and you're right back where you started. The problem is, at least currently in this current thing, system memory of activities is a really bad term. I don't know, that's hard to understand. And I don't have a way of describing this page on the page or this graph without screenshotting it and putting it in a help file somewhere elsewhere that people can look at. Actual effectiveness was simply that memory of the level with some other modifiers. So you can see that even if you do something, it's not always as effective as you think it is. It's the declining returns. And then this other one here is waste buffer versus customer attack. Throughout the game is this hidden thing, which is what the customer actually wants. It's this purple line here. This is how many articles they actually want. And you can see the database starts up much higher than they want because it's got a bunch of junk. And you actually were getting close to doing it right here. You were in a nice sweet spot here, but you reacted to old information and took out too many articles, and now they didn't have enough of what they needed. This, again, is a lesson in this particular field because it's hard to often see what this is. No one knows it. And there's just information here, but I don't have a good way of, maybe a facilitator's in the room explaining this is obviously the human part, right? That would be the human part of teaching this, but if it's remote or online, how do you teach those things? And that's the game as it is right now. You can go back and see, do it again and kind of read the tips and follow it and get a higher score and play it multiple times. And there's lots of different behaviors that can be generated with this, all of them fairly realistic to the choices you make and the behaviors of 5S in an intangible environment. I'm going to pause right there before we go into the model itself and see. I mean, I just whipped through this very quickly, but if we go back to
does the game have timeout? Have the time to finish it one time?
It goes at your pace.
Okay.
It's at your pace.
Yeah, I think the key with games is the debrief, whether it's interactive like this online or with a facilitator, helping people understand why whatever happened.
Right.
That's crucial.
And that's where I ran into a real problem is, how do I use the interface to communicate that? Because you have a virtually unlimited number of explanations. but a limited number of screen space and buttons and complexity, and pretty soon you're getting into conditional scores, and it's getting tricky. Do you just say, well, this is only a game that can be used for facilitation, or do you put a little clip with a YouTube video of someone there explaining it? Or
I think Gary Hirsch, you know Gary?
No.
He writes a lot in healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
But
okay, I know that.
he's done a lot of modeling of system dynamics models turning into games. And he likes to provide players of this sort of game, single person on a screen like this, with some canned scenarios that they have to go through first, with some an associated canned explanation, so they can see why, tie what happened to why it happened before he lets them freestyle.
Interesting.
And he's found through experience.
So rather than letting them just learn in a sandbox at first, you say, here are 3 or 4 ways that people commonly do 5S, and you give them the outbriefs and the way of they play it?
Well, they work their way through it. I guess it's not quite playing it in the same way as here where you do whatever you want. And there's sort of a predetermined time shape or time path.
Right.
And then there's a canned brief associated with it, so they can start to tie the red curve to this explanation and the green curve to this other piece of what happened. And only then, when they've completed that, does he allow them to sort of freestyle.
So I guess in the way that these interfaces are built, you could build a set of interfaces that are a demo game that because the great thing about this is you can kind of use templates back and forth and sort of reuse ones. You could have a demo game that right here says, it's week 4, this has happened, press these buttons. And you do it, and it can explain and will take you through the exact same stuff. I mean, it gets complex on the back end where you have 67 interface screens that you're managing, but I think that would be a way of accomplishing that demo.
Yeah, I think he has a game where high school kids try to run a newspaper, where he does this sort of stuff. I'm going from memory; it's a while ago, but I think that's.
And the game is not meant to be easy; it's meant to be realistic. So there's a challenge there in that it's not just do this, and there's a lot of hidden information, and a lot of the lean players I've given it to liked the realism, but disliked that they didn't know certain things. They said, well, I would have looked for that. So the question is, do you say there's hidden information, like the tack time and the erroneous articles, the things that you don't know, or do you just leave that for the debrief?
Yeah, one of the other things, again, as things are popping in my mind as you're talking here, I think it was Dennis who argues that if you're going to make a game for police officers to learn to do something, don't make the game a police station.
Right. Because
they're too close to the subject area.
Yeah,
And they'll critique it like, well, I wouldn't do that, so your game is crappy.
Yeah.
Or I would need this in the real world, and I do this every day, so I don't believe the gaming results. So you should have them play a fire station game instead of a police, or something totally different, where they'll get the same message at the end, but they're not critiquing it because they're too close to the subject matter.
Okay.
I think Dennis argued that.
Well, that's a very key thing that we already use in CPI, as we say, we give an example from some totally other field, because whenever you give examples in their field, it's just like you said, it's death by 1,000 cuts. But no, that's a very good point. So making the game something outside. Okay. Outside of the game. Let's see.
There's a more manual approach as well. So if you can't automate, if you can't come up with essentially an automated debriefer where you can classify results into categories and then shunt people to different pages in the simulation based upon the category that their results fall into to do an automated debrief, that's the typical way that we do it. What you can do is you can actually collect all the data that comes out, actually do the analysis on your own as a facilitator, and then the next day in class actually go over and pick out specific interesting runs generated by students and debrief those runs in the group.
Back up, Billy. I'm actually really interested. You talked about classify results by categories. I figured out that you could probably do a conditional, like you could have a score and then some if-then, the score is this, then pop up this type of thing. Is there a different way to do that that's a little easier that you guys have built in there to have sort of, this is a classification of result, this is a crash and burn, this is an almost succeed, this is a...
So the way that we would do that is using if-then else's and model logic. So we'd write a variable called probably, result kind. And let's say you had, 2 result kinds. if profit is less than 0, then result kind is 0. If profit is greater than 0, the result kind is 1.
Okay,
and
that's what I was thinking.
What you do is conditionally navigate in your interface and say, well, if result kind is 0, then navigate to the you lost a lot of money page. If result kind is 1, then navigate to this other page.
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking. Is it's a variable with if then else statements. I was just wondering if there was a way of doing that simpler.
No, I mean, because unfortunately it's such a wide, complicated issue, and it's so model specific because it's typically not based on just a single indicator. Like you had 3 scores, which you then somehow weighted into 1, it sounded like.
Yeah.
And maybe that score is useful, but it sounds like what's really useful for your debrief is where you land in this series, in this matrix, essentially. Because it sounds like you could do really well in one of your scores, but really crappy in another one of your scores, which means you've done crappy overall. And so what I might suggest in that case is actually debriefing score by score. And bringing people to multiple pages of debrief.
Keep talking. I accidentally deleted my results of the game, so I'm just kind of.
That's okay. Yeah. So, but automated debriefing is really hard and is not a solved problem. At least not to my knowledge. So again, to call back on my 4-year experience and the stuff that we did with Harvard Business, or the stuff that they're still doing, I have since moved on to IC Systems. But anyway, what they have done in the past, at least, is almost all of these games are played by students as a homework assignment. So in class, they'll, let's say they want to teach you about Little's Law. You'll have a whole class about Little's Law. Then that night, you are assigned homework, and that's to play, this simulation game, whose purpose is to reinforce your learning about Little's Law. And then the next day in class, the professor can actually look at a list of all of the runs generated by all of the students, pick out interesting runs generated by students, and actually do a full debrief on those runs as kind of a human interaction, rather than a computer user interaction. And that does really well to reinforce the learning for not only the person who generated that run, but all of the people who are in the class who are now, have to listen to why, Jim got the results that Jim got.
Okay.
And you can do that in the IC stuff. We have the same form of data collection.
Okay, well, so the model, going over the model, and by the way, this is a big change for me using Stella Architect or Stellatronics versus Ventum. So there's a lot of learning curve for me, but it was very productive doing this. This is the overview of the model itself that's behind it. There's got the knowledge management database is the structure of the database articles, how they're written, how they get old, how they get inaccurate. The pattern model is the waste growth, the buffer limit function. This is a previous pattern model that I've built, which shows basically the Parkinson's law of how waste expands the room you give it. The 5S functions are a separate pattern model. So these 2 lean functions act on the knowledge database, and then the output is a customer's, they're using it and they have scores. So I think to where we were talking about is, this is just simply a way of determining customer sat. So you could use these customer sat scores and 1 in each category or the blended to make conditionals. And then, or you could use down here the pattern model for 5S. It's going to look a little complicated, but it basically tracks it for each one. It's an activation when you do it, and then it's a fade effect, right? How long is that effect when you did something? And or when you apply a technique, how long does that effect last? And then these effects go in and work in different places of the model to remove old or inaccurate. And in here, you can definitely keep track of what choices they made when, but I don't know if the conditionals is well to put in there or just use those final scores and base it off that. And then, go ahead.
What I would suggest is just pulling another module out there called, just interface, and using data from your other modules to calculate your interface-related metrics. That way, it keeps your model structure pure. You don't have this interface crap, bothering your clean model. Now, what's really interesting is because it's a model and the logic is running as the model simulates, you can actually be scoring stuff in real time. So you can be keeping track of what decisions people are making at certain points in time and having that affect whatever result category they end up in. So if this was me and I was approaching this problem and I wanted to make an automated debriefing system, and I've determined that the automated debriefing system is actually theoretically possible to be made, I can narrow it down to a finite number of states where I'm willing to develop custom debrief information for that finite number of states. Then all you have to do is figure out how to classify people into these states.
That's actually, so that actually is, I can see how to do that, because when I gave it to the lean guys, they joked that they never went to the 4S, the standardized process, and if you don't do that, it doesn't work. It bombs in front of you. So they thought it was good in that regard because it showed the problem. You just, clean it up and then you just never put the process in place. But I could easily set things that said, did you ever touch 4S? Like yes or no. It's a binary. Yeah. And if you never did it, then in text says, well, if you never did it, this was the effect it had on everything else. Everything else dropped off quicker if you didn't have processes.
Right, and so you can keep track of that just using a stock. So what you can do is flow information about what people are doing into a stock, because stocks are your memories, and then you can check the values of those stocks at the end of the simulation to determine if action was ever actually taken.
Yeah, that's what these are. These are basically memory stocks here, so I can
okay.
Poke in there and take a look. And then the 5S, they come in here and do the effect. So this is the reduction of the buffer. 5S has effect here where you're doing cultural change. Most of the effects over here, you can see where they're coming in from over here is removing old and accurate. These are the inaccurate articles. This is the co-flow of age up here. So, I mean, it's the model, but this model is fairly complicated. I don't know if I'd ever want to show this, except maybe as a really at the high level to say this is the system that they're working in. Yeah. But is there any benefit at this type of game where you're really focusing on the lean techniques, the 5S techniques, the dynamics in the lean environment, to show them a model of why these things occur? Or can you just explain it without having to go in and show them the model?
So in something like this where you're teaching people, I called it procedural knowledge, how to solve a particular problem, being able to horizontally take this stuff and apply it to a totally different domain isn't as important. So learning about the true underlying structure of the system, I think, is probably less important. It's more important. They will feel that they are more successful if they are able to make a difference in solving whatever problem they're solving in their real life that is similar. So being able to apply the same thing to a totally different subject area, it sounds like isn't incredibly necessary. So then I wouldn't really get into model structure. So I would classify this game, trying to not get super involved here. This game I'd classify as a management flight simulator. It's a loaded term that means it's a game where the learning is taking place over the course of a single run or a couple of runs. And that's versus an analysis tool where all of your learning is happening by comparison to a base case. It's the analysis tools where you are really learning and teaching people about structural knowledge, structural information. So being able to understand really what's going on in the model structure and able to apply it to other problem domains. In management flight simulators, in my loaded use of that term, it's much more about training and getting people really good at performing an individual or a specific procedure. If you email me, I've got a paper which describes all of this, and I can give it to you.
I was just going to ask you that. Thank you. I'll email you. I'll follow it up. What's your is it Billy at IC or something?
B. Schoenberg at IC.
Okay, B. Schoenberg. Can that paper be shared with other folks in the CLM? Or
yeah, it was not at all what I ended up talking about at the conference, but that was the paper I wrote for this year's conference.
Okay. So, and that's it. That's the alpha version. It's online. It's being played by some people. I'm getting feedback from lean folks and stuff like that. I think that analysis tool, there are certain lean pattern models, I can totally see like Kanban using that versus a baseline to say, hey, what are the differences of using these 5 or 6 different rules by themselves or combination versus the baseline? But I think this automated debrief thing is key to have a facilitator because there's so many potential.
I think another point that the gaming guys talk about is having levels of play. Mm-hmm. That the way they teach people to do very complex things, whether it's killing zombies or whatever the case may be, is to have different levels of difficulty in the game, and you're not allowed to move to the next level until you've mastered the previous level. So you might consider a family of these simulations, the first quite rudimentary with only one metric and one,
a feedback
loop or something like that.
Yeah.
And they goof around with that until something convinces you, a test of some sort. And the gaming guys have ways to test you by asking you an exam question, but they also can test you in their games to see if you know how to do something, if you learn to do something, and then you're allowed to advance to the next level, so that by the time you get to the Wild West, where they can change anything they want, and it's a multi-criteria decision function or a scoring function and what have you, they've previously progressed through these other stages and have a fighting chance of understanding what.
So it's basically like leveling your sensei up in the lean term. You'd be leveling up to get your skills to do it. That you'd start, because I did call this out as medium difficulty, because most times when they teach 5S, they teach you static pictures and you're not really dealing with any sort of customer feedback. It's in a perfect world. It always works. But no, that's the levels. So it'd actually be different games or levels within a game, depending on the size and complexity of the game.
Yeah, and the gaming guys will tell you they have the data. It's some ridiculous number of games that are out there, even just the fun games. Something I forget, 800,000 or whatever on the Apple Store, and most of them are free.
Right.
So the question is, how do you get your game played by people? And it's got to be engaging. They say every game, people get bored with every game ever invented.
Right.
The question is, how quickly do they get bored and move on? And you want to be engaging so that they'll stick with it longer than the next guy's game. So again, is it one game that has multi-levels and there's this competitive thing where they want to get to the top level so they stick with it and deal with the simpler levels, or is it a family of related games? I don't know. Again, the gaming guys have some.
I have an anecdote from the military that's right on that thing about engaging and sort of real world. When they were experimenting with augmented reality, they had soldiers they would put them in a first-person shooter game, but all their stats in game would be based off their real world. So their last PT test would determine how fast they could move. Their last marksmanship score would determine how accurate the rifle was. And it was used originally to train them how to counter IED, roadside bombs. This is where I ran into it. I was doing roadside bomb work. And so they would have little icons flash to remind you of the tools and the types of bombs, and they would hope that in the field you would remember, okay, this type of bomb. What they found as an unanticipated effect is that soldiers would they were so upset about being slow or shooting poorly, they would go work out in the gym and try and level up their real-world abilities so they would have better performance in the game. Because these kids are mentally how do I get the high score? Well, I'm not moving fast enough. Let's go do some workouts or stuff. And so that was I think a weird feedback between where the game they would do real-world activities. And I think that concept I think that's a good point, that it's got to be engaging, it's got to be fun. And I think that's where a lot of corporate games fall flat on their face, to be honest. It's just boring as heck and no one wants to do it. So obviously the graphics here are not the attraction. I'm just using really generic stuff and trying to pull together basics. No, this has all been really good feedback. And that's what I have is a simple game. It's a fairly simple model. It's got the pattern models here, 2 of the ones that I've been building. I've got 16 developed so far now. The next iteration will probably be on the Kanban pattern model, which is a whole project dynamic setup with multiple pattern models in it to show how the interface and work. But this was just, I went to the conference, I went to Billy's presentation, and I went to all of them actually. I sat in the Stella room all day, or Stella IC room all day, and it was this gaming thing. I had to design a game, so this is the first attempt at building a game. I recommend people do it, to try it. I think this is a great way to learn all this stuff about gaming, and a great way to present our models in a way that cuts through. The biggest problem we have is our models look like junk, and people are bored at the boxes and the flows, and it's not interesting. Anything you can do to make it engaging and fun, I think, moves us forward 20 years. So
Yeah, part of this is in the realm of implementing model-based strategies. If you work with a team of experts, maybe it's a half dozen people, and you build this wonderful model, and it goes through your whole laundry list of things that build confidence in the system dynamics model. It's all good. Well, it's great for those 12 people who help build the model. Now you want your organization to do something based on the model, to use the model, to learn from it, change behavior, whatever. How do you do that? And this idea of turning it into a game that will engage people who didn't participate in the creation of the model to learn the insights and begin to change. That's one attempt to try and do the Peter Senge learning organization deal and what have you. And I don't think we've fully mined that shaft yet, that vein.
I know there's a lot of application in things like lean and agile, where you're talking about human behavior, especially in the soft side, not just in manufacturing, but as it moves into healthcare, financing, and technology. These tools interacting with people are very ambiguous, dynamic, confusing situations. So a simulation that can replicate those might be useful. But I think also what I'm hearing is, don't even call it a game. It's training someone on negotiating skills or collaboration or things like that. And it's a multiplayer game now, but it's really more of an experience. That's a little bit beyond my reach of but I know it's what's going on in gamification in general, as you're trying to corporations are looking more, and government agencies always looking more at how do we shift from, that kind of shift from the teaching where we just have the one guy up at the front of the classroom, with everyone sitting in a row, just absorbing in the book, to something a lot more interactive with the team members doing it. So that's all I have for the presentation this week, so we can end it a little bit earlier. Next week, I think we have Hamilton will be presenting from Brazil, and let me hand this back over. Oops, wrong button. And I've got 2 topics from him. Again, if you want to present, Billy, if you want to present something that's work in progress and get feedback on, we'd be happy to have it. The goal here is to get the work in progress of people that are working on and get the feedback. So that's it for today. Thanks everyone for attending. And if anyone else has something to present, Fred, if you want to get something, be happy. Lagana, if you want to bring your dissertation up and give it a whirl, let me know. Hit me up offline. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We'll go ahead and close the recording off here.